The galaxy was vast, its expanse filled with wonders beyond imagination. Among the countless stars lay a small, fragile outpost of humanity, a colony clinging to life on the edge of known space. Once a beacon of ambition and exploration, it was now a battered remnant, its cities reduced to rubble, its people hunted. The Zarnax, a cold and calculating alien race, had descended upon them without warning, claiming the colony as their latest conquest. Their warships hovered ominously in the sky, casting long shadows over a land already drenched in despair. Humanity was losing. No, they had already lost. Resistance was a word spoken in hushed tones, more a prayer than a strategy. The Zarnax weren't just conquerors, they were executioners. Entire regions had been leveled, their populations erased with brutal efficiency. Every human advance had been met with overwhelming force, and every plea for mercy had been ignored. The alien overlords had made one thing clear: this was not a negotiation, this was extermination. Amidst the devastation stood King Alaric, the last monarch of Earth and its colonies. He was a man of dignity, his shoulders carrying the weight of millions of lives. Alaric was no mere figurehead. His words had once inspired armies, and his vision had once driven humanity to the stars. But now, those same stars seemed indifferent to their plight. The king had done everything he could, rallied the troops, sought alliances, and even attempted diplomacy with the Zarnax. Each effort had failed. The people looked to him still, not for leadership, but for hope. Yet, even Alaric could see the cracks forming. His advisors whispered of mutiny among the ranks, of citizens turning on one another in desperation. Fear had poisoned the air. He was a symbol, yes, but symbols could not stop death from descending. The Zarnax had underestimated humanity's resilience, but that resilience was waning. There were no more reinforcements, no secret weapons waiting in the wings. The colony's resources were depleted, its fighters exhausted. In their final broadcast to the humans, the Zarnax commander delivered a chilling ultimatum: surrender or face annihilation. As Alaric stood in the War Council chamber, surrounded by advisors and military leaders, the air was thick with tension. Maps of scorched cities and destroyed fleets covered the table before them. The discussion was not about victory, it was about survival. Ideas were thrown out, some pragmatic, others bordering on madness. But it was the youngest voice in the room, a civilian strategist, who suggested the unthinkable. "We can't beat them with strength," the strategist said, his voice trembling. "But we can use their arrogance against them. They see us as weak. We make them believe it. We give them what they think they've already won." Eyes turned to the young man, then to Alaric. The king's expression was unreadable, but his silence was deafening. The room fell into chaos as the suggestion was debated. It wasn't just a plan, it was a gamble with their very humanity. In that moment, Alaric made a choice. If his people needed him to be more than a king, more than a man, he would become whatever they required. He raised a hand, silencing the room. His voice, calm and steady, carried a weight that demanded attention. "If my sacrifice can give humanity a chance," he said, "then so be it." No one spoke. The words hung in the air like a death knell. The king, who had always been their guiding light, was now offering himself as their shield. The war was no longer about pride or territory, it was about survival at any cost. As the council dispersed, the murmurs of rebellion subsided, replaced by a grim determination. Alaric walked alone through the ruined halls of the palace, his mind heavy with what was to come. He had always believed in the strength of his people, in their ability to rise above adversity. Now he would test that belief to its limit. The stars outside seemed dimmer than before, as if mourning what was to come. Yet, within the king burned a fire that would not be extinguished. Humanity had faced extinction before. This time, they would do whatever it took to endure. The Zarnax fleet loomed in the sky, an unrelenting force of nature. Their ships, sleek and obsidian, cast shadows that seemed to drain the color from the world below. Every passing day brought new destruction, new losses. Humanity's fighters, brave as they were, had been reduced to pockets of resistance, too disorganized to mount a meaningful defense, too stubborn to surrender. Beneath the ground, in hidden bunkers and collapsing shelters, the survivors gathered in desperation. It was here, among the hollowed-out remains of humanity's dreams, that the plan began to take shape. The council's debates were over. The king's decision was final. But the implementation required precision, secrecy, and an acceptance of the unthinkable. Every detail mattered. There could be no missteps. The strategists worked tirelessly, their minds racing against the ticking clock of annihilation. Messages were relayed in code, orders issued in whispers. The plan itself was as bold as it was desperate. Humanity's strength lay not in its weapons or numbers, but in its ability to adapt, to think in ways the Zarnax could not predict. Their enemies' arrogance had blinded them to the possibility of deception. The humans would use that blindness to strike back. The king's procession would be the catalyst. In the streets of the shattered colony, preparations began. Words spread quietly, passed from lips to ears, each messenger ensuring it reached only trusted allies. The people were told to gather, unarmed, unthreatening, their faces a mask of despair. The king, their symbol of hope, would be paraded before them, a spectacle of humiliation designed to mislead their oppressors. The Zarnax would watch, believing they had broken humanity's spirit. Yet beneath the surface, the truth was far more complex. The procession was no mere act of surrender. It was a signal, a carefully orchestrated distraction that would allow covert teams to execute the second phase of the plan. While the king walked among his people, small groups of operatives would infiltrate Zarnax command posts, sabotage their technology, and plant the seeds of chaos within their ranks. The ethical questions weighed heavily on those involved. Dragging their leader through the streets, stripping him of his dignity, it felt wrong, even to those who understood its necessity. Yet Alaric himself seemed unshaken. If anything, he carried himself with greater resolve, his eyes unwavering as he addressed the resistance leaders. "I am not a king," he said. "Not today. Today I am a weapon. And weapons must be wielded." His words silenced their doubts. Whatever discomfort they felt, whatever guilt gnawed at their hearts, was buried beneath the weight of his sacrifice. If he could endure this for them, they would do no less for him. As the day of the procession approached, tension gripped the colony. Every shadow seemed to hold an enemy, every whispered conversation a potential betrayal. The Zarnax were watching, their surveillance drones circling overhead like vultures. The humans knew they couldn't afford even the smallest mistake. The entire plan hinged on convincing their oppressors that they were broken, that the king's humiliation was a sign of submission rather than strategy. Alaric spent his final night in solitude, preparing himself for what was to come. He wrote a speech, not for the Zarnax, but for his people, words that would ignite their resolve even as they witnessed his degradation. It was a delicate balance to strike, inspiring defiance while appearing defeated. But Alaric understood his role. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a rallying cry, a beacon of hope wrapped in the guise of despair. The resistance leaders worked through the night, finalizing the details of the operation. They synchronized their movements, ensuring that each team knew their targets and their timing. The infiltrators would carry the weight of humanity's survival on their shoulders. If even one of them failed, the entire plan could collapse. At the same time, the people of the colony prepared themselves for their part. They were the audience in this grim theater, their reactions as important as the actions of the king himself. They practiced their roles, feigning hopelessness, learning to mask their anger and fear. Children were coached to cry on cue, their tears a dagger in the hearts of the watching aliens. When dawn broke, the colony was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of desperation and struggle had been replaced by an unnatural stillness. The Zarnax, ever watchful, noted the change. They interpreted it as submission, the final breaking of humanity's will. It was exactly what the humans wanted them to believe. As the procession began, the king stepped into the streets, his head bowed, his regal robes replaced with tattered garments. The people gathered around him, their faces a study in grief and despair. The Zarnax drones hovered closer, their sensors capturing every detail. To the aliens, this was the sight of a conquered species, their once proud leader reduced to a figure of pity. But beneath the surface, the humans were anything but defeated. In hidden bunkers and abandoned buildings, the infiltrators moved into position. Their weapons were primitive by Zarnak standards, but they were wielded with precision and ingenuity. They targeted power grids, communication hubs, and key personnel, each strike calculated to sow maximum confusion. The king, meanwhile, played his part to perfection. His speech, delivered in a voice that carried over the hushed crowd, was a masterpiece of double meaning. To the Zarnax, it sounded like an admission of defeat. To his people, it was a call to arms, a reminder that this was not the end but the beginning of their resurgence. As the Zarnax focused their attention on the spectacle, they failed to notice the storm brewing beneath their feet. The humans were not surrendering. They were preparing to strike. And the king, walking with measured steps through the streets of his shattered kingdom, was the fulcrum on which their survival turned. The streets were a mixture of ruin and despair, lined with shattered buildings and the scars of relentless bombardment. Humanity's last colony had become a graveyard of hope, yet on this day, the streets teemed with life. The people gathered not out of celebration but compulsion, their faces drawn, their movements hesitant. Fear and confusion rippled through the crowd. Whispers of the procession had spread, and now they stood as witnesses, unsure of what they were about to see. The king emerged, escorted by a small group of resistance fighters. His once pristine robes were gone, replaced with rags that hung loosely on his frame. His face, though smeared with dirt and exhaustion, bore no trace of shame or hesitation. Alaric walked with purpose, his head held high despite the degradation thrust upon him. He was no longer a king in their eyes. He was a relic of what they had lost, a symbol stripped bare. The crowd's reaction was a mix of grief and anger. For some, this was the final insult, the moment their hope was extinguished. Others clenched their fists, their rage barely contained, not at the king but at the situation that had brought them to this point. Children clung to their parents, confused by the sight of their leader reduced to this state. Above them, Zarnak's drones hovered silently, recording every detail for their overlords to witness. The procession moved forward, slow and deliberate, each step calculated to convey the image of a broken people. Alaric's face remained stoic, but his eyes scanned the crowd, meeting the gazes of those who dared to look up. In those brief moments, he communicated what no words could. This was not the end. As the crowd thickened, the murmurs of doubt began to fade. The people, even in their despair, began to sense something beneath the surface. There was a subtle rhythm to the procession, an orderliness that belied its chaotic appearance. The resistance fighters flanking the king exchanged glances, their movements synchronized. This was no aimless march, it was a signal, a distraction. In the shadows of the surrounding ruins, small groups of operatives moved with precision. They slipped past Zarnak's patrols and security grids, their objectives clear. Each carried a specific task: disabling communication relays, sabotaging energy conduits, planting explosives in key locations. The Zarnaks, confident in their dominance, had grown lax, their attention focused entirely on the spectacle unfolding in the streets. Alaric paused at the center of the crowd, his voice rising above the murmurs. He began to speak, his tone heavy with weariness, yet laced with an unyielding resolve. To the Zarnaks monitoring the event, his words sounded like a surrender, an admission of defeat. But to the humans, they were a lifeline. "My people," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We stand here, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as survivors. They have taken much from us, our homes, our loved ones, our dreams. But there is one thing they cannot take: our will." The crowd grew silent, hanging on his every word. Alaric continued, his gaze sweeping over them. "They believe this is the end. They think we are broken. But they do not understand what it means to be human. They do not know the strength that lies in our unity, the the fire that burns within us. Today we show them. Not with swords, not with ships, but with our spirit. They may destroy our bodies, but they will never claim our souls. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a low, guttural roar. It was the sound of defiance, of a people pushed to their limit. The Zarnax drones hovered closer, their sensors capturing the shift in energy. Yet the aliens, accustomed to domination, saw only the surface. To them, this was a final, pitiful rallying cry. As the king continued his march, the operatives completed their tasks. Explosions rocked the outskirts of the colony, targeting key Zarnax installations. The aliens, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Their systems faltered, their communications disrupted. For the first time, the Zarnax faced confusion, their precise operations thrown into disarray. The procession reached its apex as Alaric climbed onto a makeshift platform. From this vantage point, he could see the entire crowd, their faces turned upward, their despair now mingled with determination. He raised his arms, not in surrender but in command. "This is our stand," he declared, his voice carrying across the ruins. "We will not go quietly. We will not bow. If they want to extinguish us, they will face the fire they have ignited. Let them come. Let them see what it means to defy the impossible." The crowd roared in response, their cries echoing through the broken streets. The drones, still recording, sent the images back to their masters. The Zarnax, observing from orbit, interpreted the display as desperation, a species clinging to pride in its final moments. They saw no threat, no possibility of resistance. They saw only prey. But within the crowd, the resistance leaders signaled their teams. The final phase of the plan was underway. The explosives planted earlier were detonated in unison, creating a chain reaction that rippled through the colony. Zarnax ships stationed on the ground were consumed in fireballs, their sleek hulls crumpling under the force. The aliens' command posts collapsed, their carefully constructed hierarchies splintering in an instant. The Zarnax, for all their technological superiority, had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice everything. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to turn even their weaknesses into weapons. As chaos engulfed the alien forces, Alaric stood tall, his presence a beacon for his people. He had become the fulcrum of their survival, not through power but through sacrifice. The Zarnax had wanted to break humanity, to extinguish their spirit. Instead, they had given them a reason to fight. The aftermath was chaos. Fires burned across the colony, their smoke curling into the sky where Zarnax warships still hovered, motionless. The explosions had shattered the alien command structure, leaving their forces scattered and disorganized. On the ground, Zarnax soldiers stumbled through the wreckage, their usual precision replaced by confusion and panic. Among the humans, the mood was electric. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were not running or hiding. They stood together, emboldened by the sight of their enemies in disarray. Resistance fighters surged forward, seizing weapons from fallen Zarnax and using them against their oppressors. Ordinary citizens joined in, wielding whatever they could find, their fear replaced with fury. The plan had worked, but the cost was evident. The streets were littered with the injured and the dead, humans who had given their lives to make this moment possible. Despite the victory, the colony was still on the brink. The Zarnax, though momentarily crippled, were far from defeated. Their fleet remained a looming threat, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. Alaric stood in the heart of the colony, his tattered form surrounded by a sea of his people. He had seen the devastation up close, had felt the weight of each life lost under his watch. Yet he remained steadfast, his presence a pillar of strength for those who looked to him. The procession had ended, but his role was far from over. Word spread quickly among the resistance. The infiltrators had done more than just disable key systems. They had uncovered a vulnerability in the Zarnax fleet. The aliens had relied on centralized coordination for their operations, and the sabotage had exposed a critical weakness. If the humans could strike at the fleet's command ship, they could cripple the entire invasion force. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. Alaric called for a meeting of the resistance leaders, their faces grim as they gathered in the ruins of the council chamber. The plan was audacious, a final strike using salvaged alien technology to deliver a crippling blow to the Zarnax. "This is our chance," Alaric said, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was proposing. "They are vulnerable, but it won't last. We must act now, or we will lose everything we've fought for." The leaders agreed, though the tension in the room was palpable. They knew the risks, understood the slim odds of success. But they also knew there was no alternative. The resistance mobilized every able-bodied person contributing to the effort. Engineers worked tirelessly to modify stolen Zarnax equipment, turning the enemy's tools into weapons of their own. As the preparations unfolded, Alaric took a moment to address the people. He stood atop a makeshift platform, his voice carrying across the devastated colony. "We have seen what they think of us," he began, his tone resolute. "To them, we are nothing more than insects to be crushed. But we are more than they will ever understand. We are human. We endure. We fight. And today, we show them that we will not go quietly into the dark." The crowd erupted, their cheers echoing through the ruins. Alaric's words ignited something deep within them, a fire that could not be extinguished. The Zarnax had underestimated humanity's spirit, and now they would pay the price. The final assault began at dawn. Using the chaos sown by the earlier sabotage, the resistance launched a coordinated strike against the Zarnax fleet. Modified transports, barely held together by human ingenuity, carried brave volunteers into the heart of the alien armada. Alaric insisted on leading the mission, despite the protests of his advisors. "This is not just a fight for survival," he told them. "It is a fight for our future. And a king does not ask his people to do what he is not willing to do himself." The battle was brutal. The Zarnax, though weakened, fought with the ferocity of a cornered predator. Human ships weaved through enemy fire, their pilots pushing themselves to the limits. On the ground, resistance fighters held off waves of alien reinforcements, buying precious time for the assault on the command ship. Inside the Zarnax flagship, Alaric and his team faced overwhelming odds. The corridors were a labyrinth of alien design, every turn a potential death trap. But they pressed on, their determination unshaken. Each step forward was paid for in blood, but they refused to falter. At the heart of the ship, they reached their target, the Central Command Nexus, a pulsating core of alien technology that controlled the entire fleet. The Zarnax guards fought fiercely, but the humans, driven by sheer willpower, overwhelmed them. Alaric himself delivered the final blow, a detonator in hand as he activated the explosives planted around the Nexus. The blast reverberated through the ship, tearing it apart from within. The Zarnax fleet, suddenly cut off from its command structure, descended into chaos. Ships collided, their systems failing as the humans seized the opportunity to strike. One by one, the invincible warships fell from the sky, crashing to the surface in flames. On the ground, the people watched in awe as the symbols of their oppression were destroyed. The sky, once filled with the shadows of the Zarnax, now blazed with the light of their defeat. Cheers erupted across the colony, a sound of triumph that drowned out the echoes of battle. But victory came at a cost. Alaric and his team had not escaped the flagship before the explosion. The king who had led his people through their darkest hour was gone, his sacrifice the price of their survival. In the days that followed, the colony began to rebuild. The people, inspired by Alaric's example, worked tirelessly to restore what had been lost. The king's name became a symbol of unity, his actions a testament to the strength and resilience of humanity. The Zarnax invasion was over, but the scars it left behind would not fade easily. Yet in those scars lay a story of defiance, of sacrifice, of a people who refused to be extinguished. Humanity had faced annihilation and emerged stronger, their will unbroken. As the colony rose from the ashes, the people looked to the stars not with fear, but with determination. They had been tested and had proven themselves worthy. Whatever lay ahead, they knew one truth: humanity would endure.